Apologise for the slight technical hitch there. Good evening and welcome to today's meeting of the Governance Committee. I'm Councillor Howard Wollaston, and in the absence of the Chairman, Councillor Eric Paddington, I will be chairing the meeting. Today's meeting is being held over both Zoom and with councillors present in the meeting room. In addition to myself, the other members of the committee in attendance are Dominic Bowick, Laura Coyle, Billy Drummond, Owen Jeffrey, Janine Lewis as a substitute for Jeremy Cottam, and Adam Macro as a substitute for Eric Paddington and Stephanie Stevenson. Simon Carey, the independent member of the audit, is also in attendance. Independent members and members on Zoom are permitted to speak at the meeting, but they are not permitted to propose, second or vote on the items. Shannon Coleman Slaughter, Section 151 Officer, Sarah Clark, the Monitoring Officer and Interim Executive Director Resources, and Nicola Thomas, the Service Lead for Legal and Democratic Services, will be advising at the meeting. Daria Sarazel is in attendance as the clerk, and Sam Chiverton is the Zoom host. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route, which is shown to us by the trained officers present. Please follow any of their instructions. The assembly point is the car park of the Dolphin Pub. Have we had any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence were received from Councillor Eric Pattenden, who is substituted for Councillor Alan Macro, Parish Council Representative David Southgate, Councillor David Marsh, and Councillor Jeremy Cottam, who is substituted for Councillor Janine Lewis.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
We received none, Chair.
Okay. In that case, we move on to item 3, which is being introduced. I'm sorry, Councillor Burke.
Chairman, I have been subject to the Appendix E process that we'll be discussing in, I just guess, agenda item 3, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So far, Chairman, twice have been reported by the same person and found not guilty.
Any others? No? Right. Let's move on to item 3 then, which is going to be introduced by Nicola Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you've had an opportunity, members, to read the report that's before you. But in summary, this is the work of the Constitutional Review Task Group, who have been building on the work of the previous administration to update and amend the Constitution. This report outlines that the focus is around Part 13, which is the codes and protocols, and it's proposing some pretty big changes to the current Constitution Part 13 going forward. So what I will do is, if members are happy, is I'll just summarise those for you, and you've got the papers before you sort of detailing the line by line amendments. But in essence, what's being proposed is that the process for dealing with standards complaints will be amended to enable an initial assessment by the monitor officer, and that's effectively to just ensure that all the paperwork is received for that initial assessment and avoids any assessments being considered without proper evidence, and effectively, because we have an independent persons coming into the office to consider those in conjunction with the monitoring officer. So it's just a kind of first stage to ensure that all the evidence is gathered and it's meeting the correct criteria. And then it proceeds to an initial assessment. That process is not changing. And then what is the current process at the present time, that if at the initial stage it's felt that there may be a breach of the investigation, that will then go on to an independent assessment. It would go to an advisory panel, and that advisory panel would then make recommendations to the governance committee on that potential breach of the code. What's being proposed is that advisory panel stage would be removed. That reflects the Local Government Association process and has been felt by all of those that have been involved in the process that that's an added layer that just adds further time to the process and not necessarily informing the governance committee around those standards complaints that proceed to a full investigation. So that's what's being proposed in relation to the kind of standard complaints process. In addition, what's being suggested is that the appendix around the codes of conduct in relation to members, there'll be one code of conduct for members to consider. So that's the Appendix H. So we will delete all the other appendix that had different codes of conduct in relation to the licensing committee and the planning committee. So there'll just be one code of conduct that is detailed in the pack before you. And it will also reflect the NOLAM principles of 7 NOLAM principles, which is again the Local Government Association guidance. And it just reduces it down from 10. In effect, it's not changing the code of conduct as such, because the 10 code of conduct previous NOLAM principles that we referred to were just expanded on those NOLAM principles, which are now proposed in this paper. In addition to that, there's also proposed amendments to the minor amendments to Part 13. Part 3, apologies, and that enables the leader of the administration to make an annual speech, annual report, and an opportunity for the opposition party to respond, and also increases speaking rights from 3 minutes to 5 minutes. So they're not major changes, but that's before you today to consider. So I hope that's kind of a whistle-stop tour. It does reflect a lot of work that's been undertaken by the Constitution Review Group. We've met 7 times in the last, I think, 12 months. It's been quite a considerable piece of work behind the scenes to get it to this stage. So happy to take any questions or clarification that might be helpful.
Can I just start off by thanking both the committee that looked at this and the group. I was involved at the early stages, and I know how much hard work's gone into it. Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a number of changes and I would think preferable phrases to use in various places. How do you want to tackle it? Do we want to go through it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. A number.
Are these sort of fairly minor changes, or are they significant?
Mostly they're minor and apply to the use of the English language. 1 or 2 of them, I think, are a bit more significant.
Could I suggest that we'll be looking at significant ones, and that you can speak separately out of this meeting with you and it, to get the sort of changes of wording?
And is that going to be an acceptable way if it's been if it goes through, voted through?
I'm happy to take any suggestions on the, I have to say, you look at this so many times, so happy to take any suggestions on changing of wording that might assist the reading of the document outside of this meeting. So I'm happy to take any suggested rewording of the document outside of this meeting that are minor. I'm happy to take this forward, but if there's any major changes, perhaps we could go through those for the committee to consider this evening.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I assume then that if Mrs. Thomas does not consider that an item is minor, in contradiction perhaps to Councillor Jeffrey's view, that Mrs. Thomas' view will prevail? I.e., you say it's not minor, Owen says it is, you win.
Is it intended that any of the suggestions would change the meaning of the Constitution as redrafted? And it should be minor, in my view.
Forgive me, Chairman. I'm sorry. I'm saying that on the words that have been exchanged in the last 5 minutes, I would think this is something that I need to go through with Nicola in due course when it's convenient.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of issues. One is there's through the procedure, there's various kind of timescales. So, for example, in section 8.4, then comments need to be received within 10 clear working days, and then there's another one after 3 clear working days. I haven't seen anywhere what would happen if a complainant or the subject member weren't available for a good reason. You know, for example, they're away on holiday, in hospital, or whatever. So I really think there ought to be some, perhaps overriding thing somewhere to say that if a timescale can't be reached, then the monitoring officer can agree to an extension.
I'm just trying to find the section. We did try to capture that at the outset, that if they.
So that was just an example. There's quite a few throughout the document of, you know, right from the beginning that material has to be supplied within so many working days and so on.
Yes, I would accept. It does at some point, I'll try and find it for you, refer to the fact that without reasonable explanation, I can confirm in practice that if a subject member or complainant contacts either the Democratic Services or Monitoring Officer, any explanation of needing an extension of time would be considered, and it would be considered on its merits at the time. But I accept that that could be reflected in the document.
Thank you. And on a kind of similar vein, in section 10.13, if I can just scroll down. It says if the subject member or complainant are not present at the start of the meeting, this is a meeting of the committee, the committee shall adjourn to enable them to attend unless they are satisfied that there is sufficient reason for their failure to attend, in which case the committee may resolve to proceed in their absence. That seems to be the wrong way around to me. I would have thought, you know, if they have a good reason, then they should be adjourned. If they don't, then proceed in their absence.
Sorry, could you just remind me the reference, 10.3?
1, 3.
Oh, 10,
Page
0.1, 3 and little 3 in brackets. This is attendance of the subject member and complainant at the committee. It's on page 25. Well, electronic 25 anyway.
I can amend that so it reads in that way. So, so it should be that the. I'm just making a note, Councillor. So if I put unless they're satisfied that there is a reason for their non-attendance, it shall proceed in their absence in effect.
Thank you.
Councillor Stevenson.
Sorry, if I may go back, Chair, with your permission,
Yep.
the point around the timescales in paragraph, it's 3.6. I couldn't find it earlier. If it adds there 3.6, where the subject member has not commented in 15 working days has elapsed and they have not provided a reasonable excuse for the delay, I can add that bracket into the other timescale, so it's clear that if there is an explanation or need for extension, we can consider that. The whole point of tightening up those timescales was that we've had previous standards complaints that haven't been as timely as we would hope. So it's I think on reflection, it's been acknowledged that that has been added stress to both the complainant and the subject member and others involved. So we've just tried to be quite clear that the expectation is that these are dealt with in a timely way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine's a very general question and you've partially answered it already. what was the driving force behind these amendments when they were first started? Was the process faulty in your belief and the belief of West Berkshire Council? And will these changes make the processes, particularly where it's a complainant against a member, will these changes make the process better for everybody involved?
The work of the Constitution Review Task Group has been ongoing for, I think, a number of years with the previous administration. Part 13 was it's the third tranche of the review. So it's the final stages of that review process, although I think it would be fair to say that any amendments to the Constitution is a rolling document that needs to be kept under constant review because there are changes. Part 13, I think through experience of recent times, we've had some larger standards complaints that have resulted in coming to the committee that have enabled us to reflect it as part of this review task group. But I think the whole point is to just try and reflect on the Local Government Association guidance on standards complaints and ensure that we are doing a process that's fair and transparent for all involved.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I welcome the, broadly speaking, these changes, particularly the removal of the advisory panel and the overall and the intention behind the shortening of the time of overall runtime of the process. I guess what my concern here is that there are a number of decision points, and my concern is one of consistency. My own personal experience is that, and perhaps it's somewhat subjective, is that I acknowledge that, is that we haven't always seen a consistent approach in the handling of standards complaints. So how do we make that absolutely rock solid?
I think in dealing with any standards complaints, it's a subjective assessment by those involved based on the facts. So it's difficult to say that there will be a standard response to all standards complaints because it will be based on the facts that are before that individual considering. However, what I can say is that there's the initial assessment stage is supported by an independent person. And we've got 3 of those available here at West Berkshire, and they offer some advice and assistance to any monitoring officer or their deputies considering those standards complaints. That stage doesn't actually make any findings of facts, it just makes recommendations that there may potentially have been a breach of the standards complaints and may offer a solution at that stage. The investigation stage, we try and use investigators that are recommended to us, and that we've had the benefit of someone who has been it's actually a retired monitoring officer that was recommended to us by a neighbouring authority, and we try and use people who are familiar with local government and that process by way of reassurance, but it would always come to this governance committee for a final, they're the final arbiter on any standards complaints that are considered.
Is there an acknowledgement, perhaps in the opposite group, that we have not, historically, not all standards complaints have been dealt with consistently?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that because they're dealt with on an individual basis.
Right. I don't know if it would assist in terms of consistency, and I'm not sure precisely what Councillor Bowick is referring to, whether that is consistency in the decision or consistency in how they are processed. And I don't know if Councillor Bowick can confirm, is it the outcome in effect that you feel has been inconsistent?
If I may, Chairman, I'll just talk about what's driving my thinking here, my questioning. When complaint was brought against me I think it was June or something, 2017. I was assured at first by officers, and Mr. Day, Andy Day, said, "Oh, I don't think this is going to go anywhere, Dominic." And then it was taken on as a case that needed to be reviewed, investigated, step by step. All the way along, I was being told, "There's nothing to worry about here. It's not going to go anywhere." And finally, I was found to be in breach of the code of conduct. The hearing acknowledged that I had made a mistake in doing so. I acknowledged that I had apologized in the chamber, on social media, on broadcast media, and in writing. And then I look at another case. I won't mention the name, I won't mention the party, but there was a member who had a complaint brought against the member. The complaint was around the way that the individual had objected to being asked a question relating to gender in an NHS setting, and there was mention of the ethnicity of the person who asked the question, so on and so forth. Subsequently, the member made a statement of apology, which any fair person would say was not an open and honest apology. That individual's case was dismissed. So for me, there's a huge gap there. And I want to be assured that if in the future I'm subject of what I consider to be a highly political complaint, absolutely, that cannot be disputed, I would say. If I'm subject of another complaint, that I can be assured of consistency.
So if I can respond, I think by way of reassurance to Councillor Bowick, the code of conduct is the same code of conduct that applies to all members. By aligning it more closely with the model code, clearly there will be, it may be easier to rely on the guidance. So there's a lot of guidance linked to the model code that talks about, kind of gives examples, for example, of what might be acceptable, what might not be acceptable. And certainly that should help inform a governance committee considering an allegation. So the rules should ensure consistency of decision and consistency of outcome. But I think to Nicola Thomas's point earlier, every case is going to turn on its facts, and ultimately the decision as to whether there has been a breach following an investigation will sit with this committee. And officers can advise the committee, but ultimately you can have an investigation which an investigator may conclude that there has been a breach or that there hasn't been a breach, and this committee may determine to disagree with the investigator. And that is within the gift and control of this committee. So I think we can do everything within our power to try to ensure that there is consistency, and that is in everybody's interest, because every member who is elected as a member of this authority needs to understand these are the rules by which I must operate. So I think I fully agree that there should be consistency, but ultimately it is not within our control. That power, if you like, rests with this committee. But every case is going to be, you'll never get two cases that are identical by which you can say it was or wasn't inconsistent.
Is that Councillor Bowen?
Yeah, I'm reassured by the concept of the model, the models and examples. I just want to come on to and I'm reassured by that, Mrs. Clark. Thank you for that. I have a concern about independent persons. Now, I've seen the same independent person giving witness here in this chamber in standards complaints. And I'm not talking about anything that I was involved in other than as a member of the governance committee. And I've been surprised at the the lack of no real a poor grasp of the matters that were being debated, and I felt that the individual expressed statements largely of well, let's say of poorly informed opinion. So I guess this is I don't want. I guess my point is how and you spoke about a retired monitoring officer being an independent person.
No, so I think, and so just to clarify, I think the independent persons, I don't think have attended this committee. So the independent persons will meet with the monitoring officer at the initial stage of the complaint. So I think you are referring to the independent investigators who are appointed, and they produce the report in effect that is considered.
They're the people I think were weak.
And yes, so and I think that may vary on who has been appointed, and so and that's a struggle, finding people who are suitably qualified, that are. We don't obviously have a budget for this, so the cost of this is always a consideration, and we've had some that have cost us quite a considerable sum of money. So I think that the investigator that was referred to had come very highly recommended, was being used by other Berkshire authorities, and I think generally there was a very good understanding, if you like, of the hustle and bustle of political life. That I think sometimes allegations need to be seen in that context.
Thank you.
Councillor Drummond.
Yes, through you, Chairman. Councillor Boyd, is this the first time you brought this matter up? Why have you not brought it up before if you haven't?
That's great.
I'm not quite sure if I understand the point that's being made, or what's behind.
You seem a bit bitter. It's happened quite a few years ago, and you've just brought it up tonight. I think I don't know if you mentioned this before to the monitoring officer.
Which aspect of what I've raised have you?
What you
are you challenging me on?
What you said about the what is it called? The
independent person.
Independent, yeah. I don't know why you've just brought this up tonight.
I'm not sure why. What opportunity I would have had to express concerns. As a member of this committee, I think it's perfectly valid for me to express a concern, which I intend it to be a positive contribution to the discussion.
I can understand that, but why didn't you not mention it when it happens?
And Chairman, I'm also a bit mystified about your comment that I'm bitter. The independent person that I was referring to was giving witness to cases that I was not the subject matter, the subject member in. So there's no question of being bitter towards the independent investigator. Your bitterness that you suggest I'm expressing, you assume relates to my personal case. And I can assure you, Councillor Drummond, I am bitter about that. It still hurts.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Coyle.
Thank you. I just, one of the things that Councillor Burke mentioned was about possibly politically motivated complaints. And I note that the new pre-assessment process does talk about that being one of the bases for dismissing a complaint. I just was slightly confused as to how that fits. So there's a description and then there's a flow chart, and I'm not sure that the flow chart adequately reflects the change with the pre-assessment criteria, because it looks like that, if I'm right, then the pre-assessment bit comes before there's any discussion with anybody independent. There's an initial pre-assessment by the monitoring officer. Is that right? That then could just reject it outright. I believe that's what the pre-assessment thing is supposed to do. It says at 2.3, once they receive, the monitoring officer receives a complaint, undertake a pre-assessment within 3 working days, and the complaint may be rejected if. And then one of the, there's lots of criteria, one of about triviality and political motivation. But that stage doesn't include any discussion with an independent person, as far as I can see, because it's supposed to just get rid of it quite quickly if it doesn't meet those criteria. Is that right?
Chair, so yes, in effect, it very occasionally, I won't say often, very occasionally you receive papers that on the information that's received from the complainant would not in the monitoring officer or their deputy perhaps warrant the engagement of an independent person coming to the office to consider that it's balancing out.
I understand that those occasions would arise. I just wanted to clarify because particularly because Councillor Bowick was talking about how we make sure it's fair. In that part of the assessment, it is just the monitoring officer. There's not any independent person involved, which I think is fine. I mean, we have to trust in our monitoring officer that they fairly exclude any and all complaints that are of a similar nature. But I just wanted to clarify that. And I just wondered, going down to there's then an amended flow chart later on that explains the process. And I don't know whether it matters, but that I don't think that pre-assessment process is, maybe it is, and I'm being stupid, but.
Not at all. So members and chair, on page 39 is the flow chart. And I know that the individual who's been amending this, because it's slightly beyond my capabilities. So it's the complaint rejected. I can get that headed up, initial assessment. It says the complaint received and it goes down, complaint reviewed by the monitoring officer. And then it's to the right if it's accepted, and then to the left is the rejection. What I can do is that I can head that up as pre-assessment.
Okay.
It's
I can't see some. I don't know.
On page 39.
Yeah. Okay. Or maybe I'm looking at the wrong page. Oh, sorry. I was looking at a different page.
No, that's okay. I know we've got.
Okay.
I know in the documentation, so we've got as it stands with all the amendments, you can see exactly how it was and what's being proposed. But page 39 is the new flow chart.
Okay, and that is then right.
And we've tried to put the timeline at the side because then it makes it quite clear both for the complainant and the subject member the anticipated timescales.
Yeah, I see where you mean. If maybe it could also just say pre-assessment so that it's consistent. But yeah.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask about this flow chart, and perhaps I'm looking at the wrong one then, because this is on 30 of my pack.
It's 43 in the top bar.
It's just after page, so it's page 26, because it's still got in one of the boxes the Standards Committee hearing.
No, it's page 39.
So that's the old one, the old flow
That's the
chart.
old one you've got there.
Right, thank you very much. That explains it. Thank you.
Anything else? No, in that case, we move to vote in favour of recommendation. Do you want to read out the recommendation, Nicola, or not?
I think it would be helpful for anyone listening that they know exactly what they're voting on.
Okay. Right. It is proposed that the following amendments are considered and recommended to Council for approval. A, Part 13 Code of Conduct Appendix A be deleted. B, Part 13 Code of Conduct Appendix E to be adopted as set out in Appendix A to this report. C, Part 13 Code of Conduct Appendix G to be deleted. D, Part 13 Code of Conduct Appendix H to be adopted as set out in Appendix B of this report. Delegates to the monitoring officer in consultation with the chairman of the Constitution Review Task Group the power to update Parts 13 of the Constitution to ensure that this reflects the new rules and to make any minor additional corrections to the parts of the Constitution to ensure consistency in terminology and presentation. That the updated version of Part 3 meeting procedure rules be adopted. And finally, agrees that the changes to the Constitution detailed in this report take effect from 1st April 2025. All those in favour of the recommendation? Yep.
I would like those changes be discussed to be included in the resolution.
Chair, I was just adding to that, so it should be Part 13 Code of Conduct Appendix E to be adopted as set out in Appendix A to this report, subject to the amendments proposed at tonight's meeting.
Exactly. Sorry.
Thank you.
Forgive me, where have we got to on amending terminology and language?
I think we agreed the changes you wanted to do were basically linguistic,
But yes,
yeah, rather than in principle.
yes.
And we agreed that you would have a separate meeting outside of this to
And-
just amend it.
And you'll still be able to
Yeah.
stand even though we voted for something else.
So,
Right.
Chair,
I think we,
Councillor, just to confirm that, so the recommendation E, which delegates to the monitoring officer, that you can make, it's the minor amendments can be done anyway by the monitoring officer.
I just think we could spend the whole evening here otherwise. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, those in favour?
Sorry, Chair, can we have a proposer and seconder on that?
I'll propose to the chair. Councillor Burke got to get in first, I think. Just. Those in favour? Those against? Abstaining? Thank you, I think that's passed. Moving on to item 4, we have Chris Dagnall, I believe, coming over Zoom to introduce the report, which is the financial year-end 2024-25 year-end planning document.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So members are asked to review and approve Appendix A. So Appendix A is the annual update to the Council's Statement of Accounts accounting policies. The covering report, hopefully members have had an opportunity to review the contents, but the covering report just summarises first where we are. So if I just briefly take us through, 23-24 Statement of Accounts was approved by the Council's external auditor, KPMG, at the end of February, so 28th of February, in line with the backstop date of 28th of February. So we achieved that deadline, the Council achieved that deadline. And the covering report makes reference to that, the fact that we've, as a council, we've always hit that annual deadline. 24-25 planning is currently underway with KPMG again in their second year of reviewing. So the planning is currently underway. The Appendix A, as discussed, is the annual update for accounting policies. Just referring members to section 4.3 in the covering report. So one key change for this year, for the first time, is the adoption of IFRS 16 leases, a new accounting policy that the council is forced to adopt as a mandatory accounting standard for the first time this year. So in previous years, councils have been able to voluntarily adopt this, but only 2 councils in the UK have actually done this up to now. So it's been Crawley and Edinburgh. The council has taken advice from an experienced third party, MUFG Corporate Markets, previously Link, the council's treasury advisor, essentially, who are very familiar with the disclosure requirements and have been working with a number of other councils throughout the UK. So work is still in its early stages, but it's expected to conclude in coming weeks, with a view to then finalising this work in April and May, ahead of the draft accounts deadline this year, which is the 30th of June, extended from 31st of May which was last year's draft accounts deadline. So Appendix A is the accounting policies, and then Appendix B is the timetable for the year end along those lines, with a reflection of the extension of a month this time to the end of June. If members have any questions, I'm happy to take anything.
Could I just ask from the chair, in layman's terms,
Yes.
are we in a position now where all the previous year account years are finalised? And if not, when will we be?
Absolutely no. So the 2020-2021 accounts were the last set that had a full audit by Grant Thornton. So they've always been on the website for an extended period. The following 2 years after that were 21-22 and 22-23. So both sets of those accounts were disclaimed by Grant Thornton, who are now the previous auditors. Again, all filed within the deadline, all published on the site within the deadline. 23-24 published at the end of February 2025, just last month, 2 weeks ago, in line with the backstop date, which is now in place for all years going forward. So the next final date, if you like, for the 24-25 accounts will be next February. So February the 27th, actually, 2026. So we're up to date. And as I say, planning is now underway on 24-25. Sorry.
Could you just explain to me what the disclaim in the 21-22 and the 22-23 accounts? Does that mean it's over and finished now, or do we have to go back on it?
No, finished. It was just because of many issues really affecting both councils and auditors. So from auditors, it was a case of resource-wise, they weren't able to complete every audit of many councils. This was obviously a national issue. And then obviously on the council side, not specifically WBC, but many councils, there was the challenges arising following the end of COVID, where obviously, certain things fell behind. The working from home practices came in. So for a number of reasons, the sector faced that challenge, and it was a two-way, obviously, issue really. But the fact that those disclaimers were issued, those financial statements are now finished and complete, and the new auditor has been able to now do 23-24's accounts, albeit with disclaimed accounts for those 2 years by the previous auditor. So we are up to date. There's nothing outstanding at all for the WBC.
I think that'll be a relief to all of us. Any other questions? Councillor Macro.
Thank you. Yeah, this is probably a detail, but
yeah,
the section on post-employment benefits pensions, the last paragraph, it says the council will make an employer contribution in the region of TBC.
Yes.
And it goes on to say what it was last year, 18.5, and the previous financial year. Are we still waiting for that, or is that something?
No, absolutely. We don't have that information at the moment. We typically, councillor would take that from the actuarial report that we are still waiting on, because normally that will arrive. It normally arrives the end of April, May. We're actually at the moment still waiting though for the information requests from the actuary. So we would normally fill in how many members the council has. We would fill in various pieces of information. Now those requests were due to come through actually at the beginning of May, so slightly behind schedule. But in due course, we will confirm that payment. And the reason for putting that as a TBC at the moment is that you'll find there's a couple of other TBC placeholders in that document, and that's just because at the moment we're not at the year end yet, so just sort of reminders, if you like, to populate. But we'll populate that definitely.
Thank you very much. I do have one other item, Mr. Chairman, if I can bring it up now.
Please.
In the appendix, there's the Downs and Compton's schools, and I wonder what schools were kind of separated out.
So the Downs and Compton are distinct really on the timetable, because unlike many of the other schools, they don't use the council's Aggresso system. So it's now, obviously, Aggresso is sometimes known as Unit 4. You may know it by that name, but essentially many of the other schools use that system. Downs and Compton effectively use, I wouldn't call them, it's too crude to say manual spreadsheets, but they are Excel spreadsheets. They don't use the recognised system in line with the other schools. So we literally look at those separately. The schools team will look at those separately at the year end. So the timetable will be the same, the work will be the same, but it's just an acknowledgement that the use of the system is not consistent. That's what the reference is for.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other, Councillor Stevenson?
I'm being pedantic.
No.
Mr. Chair. On the very final page, we're referred to as Governance and Ethics Committee.
Yes.
We're only governance, so
No
ethics. We're no longer ethical. Could you cross it out?
Absolutely. I will get that changed on all the documents. That will be on a few, two, three. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. Not a problem at all. I'll do that.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? In that case, we'll move on to the recommendation then, which is to approve the draft accounting policies, which we applied in the production of the Council's 2024-25 Statement of Accounts in Appendix A. Members are requested to note the following. KPMG is the Council's external auditor. KPMG issued a disclaimed audit opinion on the Council's 2023-24 Statement of Accounts, and the financial statements were approved on the 28th February 2025. The statutory deadline for publishing the 2024-25 Statement of Accounts is 30th of June 2025, and the public inspection period will commence in early July 2025. The internal year-end timetable, which will accompany the production of the 2024-25 draft Statement of Accounts, is enclosed in Appendix B. I'd like to propose that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Macro, thank you very much. Those in favour? Thank you. As the business of the meeting has been concluded, I would like to thank all those present for their attendance and officially close the meeting.